All right, so we're going to start, and as people join us, we will just invite them in. All right, so the entire book of Ruth culminates at the scene in the city gate in chapter 4. And in this lecture, we're going to look at that. We're going to talk about why is there a sandal that's involved. If you've done Ruth before, you will know what I'm talking about. If not, you'll see what I'm talking about. Why does the first Redeemer say, I can do it, but then he says, I can't do it? And what are the implications of what comes out of that scene for our lives today and what God wants to do in the midst of our story and the stories of those that we get to touch? So we are moving towards a climatic moment in the book of Ruth. And we left at the end of last lecture, Boaz and Ruth having a conversation on a threshing floor, where Ruth says, spread a corner of your garment over me, for you are a redeemer. And the word redeemer is very significant to the story, and we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. But the way that the conversation ends is by saying, yes, I am a redeemer, but there is actually one in line ahead of me. And we also spoke about the fact that um, many would say that there's a sexual connotations in the whole scene. And we spoke about that if we look at it from a different point of view, that it actually has nothing with the sexual connotation. Right. So to understand what he meant by that, yes, I am a redeemer, but there's actually one in line ahead of me. And how that gets played out, we get to dip into chapter 4. And so let's look at verse 1 of chapter 4. It goes like this. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. I love it the way it just goes, and behold, all of a sudden, as if it wasn't planned, all of a sudden the guy was there. But anyway, now the location of this, we are told, is the gate. That's very important to the story because city gates served multiple functions. The first function is the area of traffic. Obviously, people come in and people come out. People from different parts of the world will come in and out. So there's a lot of trade. Um, and you can see there on the picture, there's an ancient ruin of the city of Gezer, one of the most beautiful gates that you will see in the land of Israel. And there's actually excavation there in Galilee. And then at the bottom, you can also see the six-chamber gate that dates back to the time of King Solomon, to give you a little perspective of what the gate entails. So it's not just an entrance, a little gate, like we have a gate, we drive our car through, or pedestrian gate, we walk through, and that's that. The gate was like the one at the bottom there, excavated. There were literally six chambers of the gate. It was quite a lot that you had to go through in order to get to the actual city. And it also functioned as a courthouse. Okay. And there's just a artist rendering of the story of Boaz and this other kinsman, a redeemer, and all the legal matters connected to a town or a village or a city would take place in the city gate. And in these excavations that I just show you, you will also be able to find benches within the city gate that people will have sat there. And sure, but when you are talking about a legal scene or a court scene, there is where the elders of the cities would sit. And so we open up the story with the city gate, which tells us that Boaz is engaging in a legal conversation with the Redeemer that's in line ahead of him. And now we get to this language again of the Redeemer. The word Redeemer that is used in the book of Ruth and here in chapter 4 is we're going to look at in a couple of times is the word Goel. okay, or Goal. And it gets translated into our English as either a kinsman, redeemer, a guardian redeemer, or a family guardian. You see, it's in a number of different ways depending upon your translation. But the essence of Goel is that there are the nearest adult male relative. Remember, women were under women were under where am I? Women were under the protection of men. So this is about an adult male relative who is responsible for coming. Sorry, I'm just being distracted here by someone. Okay, Pam is trying to get in. So let me go. Let me go back again. Remember, women were under the protection of men. So this is about an adult male relative who is responsible for coming to the aid of a relative in serious trouble or need. And there's all of these stipulation laid out to the activity of a kinsman redeemer that you can read about it in Leviticus 25. The idea here is that when someone is in need, you have a male that steps in order to redeem or to restore the situation at hand. Okay. And so we are told that Boaz then took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcels of land that belong to our relative Elimelech. Now, geez, looking at it and go, selling a parcel of land. I mean, this is new information in the book of Ruth, because remember, she came back. We thought she has nothing. So, how is she selling something if she hasn't got anything? And for many of us listening to this, it feels a bit problematic because we've been saying all along that Naomi has no rights to the property that she had before her and Elimelech left to go to Moab. But now we are told that she is selling the parcel of land. Now, this language is, as I said, problematic because it seems to imply that she had rights to that land all along. And we thought in the previous chapters that she is destitute. She hasn't got any rights. Well, what she has attached to the land is the family name. Okay. But according to Numbers 27, if the male head of the household dies and the sons die as well, then there is a transfer of property that goes between men within the family, within the larger clan. And so when you are told that she's selling the parcel of land, she really doesn't have any rights to the land. It's a whole about the name. In fact, by law, she can't raise crops on that land or sell them. But what can happen here is that if a Goel, a kinsman redeemer, steps into that role of a kinsman redeemer and is able to acquire the land back, might saying in connection to that family name, and therefore the land gets placed back into the inheritance stream of the family of who the elder father or the son dies, namely Naomi's family in this story. Does that make sense to you guys? I know it sounds very legalistic, but does that make sense to you guys?
I think so. It's very interesting. I never sort of thought of it like that.
Yeah, it's all spelled out for you in Numbers and in Leviticus. This whole thing. Okay, so where am I? So as I said, it's problematic, but if we listen to this commandment and this rule and this law, then we will see how it gets played out. And so what's being communicated here is that when they left to go to Moab, perhaps the land got passed on to somebody else in the family. Maybe there is someone who's squatting there. We don't know the situation. But if a Goel, a kinsman redeemer, steps in, that land goes back to Naomi under the protective covering of the Goel, who steps into it. Okay, and you can again read more about this in Numbers 27 if you want to do that. But the option for the Goel to engage in the role of being a Goel is on a table, and this is what Boaz is trying to say. So Boaz continues his conversation with this other kinsman redeemer, and he says, "So I thought I would tell you of it and say, but in the presence of those sitting here, in other words, the elders who are sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of the people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one beside you to redeem it. There's another one beside you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." So Boaz is basically putting the cards on the table. He's saying, if you're going to redeem it, do it. And if you're not going to redeem it, then you know what? I'm allowing you because you are older than me. You're entitled to be the next Kingsman Redeemer. I'm allowing you to have that opportunity. But if you don't want to, tell me, and then I will do it. And you must listen to the way, very, very interesting, the way Boaz sets it out, almost like in a courtroom, and then there's that twist. So the matter is brought to his attention, and no doubt he already knows what's going on here. You see, Bethlehem is not a very big place. Ruth and Naomi have been there for quite some time. We're going through the barley harvest, remember? And there's also reference that they went through the wheat harvest as well. And so this kinsman redeemer knows that he has the opportunity to step into the role. But according to the Torah, it is optional. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to do it. It's kind of a frown upon if you don't do it, and honoring shame society, it will be frowned upon. And then he says, this is the other guy, he says, well, it sounds good. I'm in. But then Boaz throws in a curveball here. And then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, okay, so this is not just a transaction of land. This is not just Naomi's land, the family's land. You also acquire Ruth, and he puts it in. It's almost like he digs it in. Not just Ruth, but Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So again, he reminds him, look, this is your Kingsman Redeemer role. This is your Goel role. You're not just going to acquire the land. You're not just going to look after Naomi, because with Naomi comes Ruth, who, by the way, just in case you didn't know, is a Moabite. And you know what they say about the Moabites. And just in case you didn't know, she's a widow because her husband, who's Naomi's son, is dead. And in order to keep the family's name, you need to take that inheritance, okay? So he's really putting it in the mix. Now, what he's doing here is very clever, because Boaz is referring here to what we call the Levirate marriage, okay? And to be a Levir is to be someone who steps in, a family member in a time of need. When a man has died and his wife has been left as a widow, both Naomi and Ruth, because Ruth was married to a Jewish man, and this is from Deuteronomy 25, 5-6, it spells it out a little bit clearer. Listen to what the scripture of 25, verse 5 and 6 says. If brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. Sure. Okay, this is a bit dicey here, okay? And Boaz doesn't spell it out. He says, look at Deuteronomy 25, verse 5 and 6. But in a way, he reminds him and says, remember, you have to take Naomi as well. And by the way, if you don't remember Deuteronomy 25, verse 5 to 6, I suggest you read it before you decide on it. Okay? Now, we don't know if this guy read Deuteronomy 25, but Boaz is saying, well, hey, Ruth is there as well, and you need to engage in marriage with her. And as a result of Boaz highlighting this man knowing the implication of this response, then the kingdom's redeemer says, well, I cannot redeem it for myself. Least I impair my own inheritance. And he says to Boaz, take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Wise man. Okay. In order to understand what just happens in this moment, it helps to try and break it down so we can see who's involved and what the implications are. Okay, so basically, what does it mean? So we begin with Elimelech and Naomi, right? I don't know if you can see me in the video. We begin with Elimelech and Naomi. There's Elimelech, there's Naomi. They have two sons, Machlon and Chilon. Elimelech dies. He's out of the picture. Okay? The boys marry Moabite wives. So we have Machlon and Chilon married to, one is married to to Ruth, the other one to Orpah. Okay? And both of the boys die as well. So they're out of the picture. So we are left with Orpah, Naomi, and Ruth. Okay? But Orpah leaves the situation, and it leaves us with Naomi and Ruth. Okay, you with me up to now, right?
Yes.
Now, with the presence now of a Redeemer, that brings in the land and his family into a conversation. So we've got Naomi, we've got Ruth, we've got Boaz on the side, and we've got this other kinsman Redeemer. But what's at stake here is the land and the family. So that's what the conversation is about. Now, the other kinsman Redeemer is married, no doubt. Okay, talks about this, and he doesn't want to impair his inheritance, which means he's got a family, which means that the other kinsman Redeemer's got a child. He has a firstborn son, no doubt, somewhere in this equation. So now we've got Naomi, we've got Ruth, we've got the kinsman Redeemer, who has probably a son. Okay, he's got family, and we've got Boaz, that we don't know that he has a family or children or anything like that. Now, Boaz says, if you step into the role of a redeemer, then you have to acquire Naomi to be a part of your family. Now, in the mind of the redeemer, he's like, okay, this is great because Ruth isn't part of the story in his mind, and therefore there is no division. Okay. But because Ruth is a part of this, land and family from Naomi comes over to my side, and now it's one family with a large inheritance. Now, his role is going to be that he's got to acquire the land back, whatever that's going to cost him, and to take care of Naomi for the rest of their life. But again, with his enlarged estate, he goes, well, it's worth it. Okay. And he hasn't brought in Ruth into the equation. He just thinks, Naomi, it's her land. I'm okay. I've got a family. I've got a son. My son, my firstborn son will inherit all of this. And that's okay. You know, I will take care of Naomi. But here's the curveball again. When Boaz says, actually, Ruth is still in the picture because Ruth was married to one of Naomi's sons, okay? Which means then by law, by Jewish law, Ruth is a part of this land. Ruth is a part of this family name, okay? And he says, well, actually, Ruth is still a part of the picture. And on the day that you acquire Naomi, you will also acquire Ruth to live into this Levia commitment. You will be married to Ruth. Okay, and as a result of this marriage, the Redeemer knows, okay, now we still have a division because the inheritance side comes back over here. And when the Redeemer and Ruth have a child, if they had to have a child, a firstborn son, it will be as if Machlon and Ruth had a son under this Levirate marriage rule. And therefore, as a firstborn son, seen as part of this couple of this Kingsman Redeemer and Ruth, okay, the inheritance stream will go through the firstborn son of Ruth as if it was Machlon and Ruth that had it. Are you with me, guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I know it sounds very complicated, and you probably will have to look at this teaching again and the notes. But it's basically to just simplify it is if he takes Ruth, he has to have be married to her. Most likely, they're going to have a child. If they have a child, then that means the inheritance is going to split. Now, some people will look at that and say that their firstborn son would actually supersede the firstborn son of the Redeemer, the first marriage, and therefore all of the inheritance will come over to the Redeemer. Others will say actually that that's not the case. But the problem is you now have two firstborn sons that will have access to an inheritance stream. And with that, the Redeemer says, I can't do that because it's going to impair my own inheritance. In other words, by law, if he does have a firstborn son with Ruth, then he has to divide not just Naomi's land, but his entire inheritance. He has to divide it into two. Okay? And he says this is going to impede my own inheritance. In other words, Mrs. Kingsman Redeemer is not going to be happy if I tell her, hey, listen, honey, I went to the city gate and I got married. And by the way, her mother-in-law is coming to live with us. She's coming to live with us. And one day we might have a child and our inheritance is going to split into two. So Mrs. Kingsman Redeemer is not going to be happy about it, right? So he says, I can't do it. Boaz, you step in and you take over for this situation. And we read this. Now, this was a custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of a testing in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Now, what is that about? Okay, I'm sure if you don't know the story, it's confusing. And if you know the story as well, you've probably heard a lot of things. What we have on the scene here after this conversation, this legal conversation, after the Redeemer says to him, you know what, you can be the Goel. I wash my hands off it. I cut myself from it. You be the Goel. This sandal thing comes. And the confusion and even the disagreement among scholars of theology, especially of biblical study theology, as to this whole sandals, are we actually referring to? Whose sandals is it referring to? Because the text in front of us is a little bit confusing, is a little bit ambiguous, is a little bit maybe not quite clear. Some will say that the grammar in here in the original language is talking about the Redeemer sandal, so the other guy, okay, and that's his sandal. Others will say that the grammar here is talking about Boaz's sandal, and the reason why there are two different opinions or options here is how you interpret the sandals present and symbolism in that moment. Okay, guys, I'm going to carry on. And then we get cut off in about 7 minutes or so. Just log on to the next session. Okay. Clearly, this was a former custom because even the writer is saying, "Hey, in former times this happened." So it's obviously a tradition or a custom that happened before this thing that's happening between Boaz and this Kingsman Redeemer. So there's some confusion around it. But if it's the Redeemer sandal, the way that this is explained is that when the option is given to him to step into the role, and he says, I'm going to be able to do it, by him taking off his sandal and handing it to Boaz, was a legal way of saying, I give you the right to step in and be the kinsman redeemer. In other words, here's my sandal, I'm giving you the right. Even though I was ahead of you in line, I'm not taking on that role. You can take it. So that's traditionally how it has been taught. And by the way, in some very orthodox homes, when a woman by law in an Orthodox Jewish home is not allowed to divorce her husband, only the husband is allowed to divorce her. Okay, that is practiced in still some very ultra Orthodox homes. And the way that if he gives her what they call is a get, a divorce, he actually takes his sandal or his shoe and he throws her in front of her. So there was obviously some attachment to that your sandal or your shoe represented where you stepped in, represented the land that you got. Can I remind you of Joshua chapter 1, where it talks about wherever you will step, God has given you that land. Okay, the spiritual implication when God says, Jesus says to us that wherever we step, that has been given to us spiritually. That battle has been won. We can just step into it. Okay, but the other option here, in our opinion here, and what some scholars contend to, is that because the purpose of Boaz stepping in is to allow the name of Machlon and Elimelech to continue on, his name is going to take a back seat to their name. And so by Boaz taking off his sandal, it's a way of saying, I'm removing my name from the situation. And symbolically, I'm putting on the sandal of Machlon, of Elimelech, of the family line, because the act that I'm going to engage in is going to restore the name so that it isn't it isn't forgotten. Sorry, it's not supposed to be. It isn't forgotten, and it isn't blotted out. So it's supposed to say it isn't forgotten or it isn't blotted out. I'm doing this for their memory, for their benefit of their family. Yes, Boaz is going to receive in return Ruth and all of this inheritance of the land, but he's also doing this at a cost to himself and his own name to live faithfully into God's commandment and into restoring a family that was brought to famine. Okay, so I mean, again, that goes in line with Boaz being Gibor Chayal, a man of honor, a man of noble character. Okay, are you guys with me so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
Any questions, observations?
This story for me has always been a foreshadowing of Jesus
Yeah.
in our. But what I'm hearing here is kind of clouding that for me. I'm not can't put it together anymore.
Okay. Because we mustn't get caught in the legalism of this thing. Okay, we must, and we will finish off with seeing how that implication is for us. We mustn't get caught in the legalism of that part of the story, but rather read behind what is actually happening and the cost that Boaz is putting into this, and in taking Ruth, Naomi, and the land and the family name and all that kind of stuff. And if you think about what the cost that it cost Jesus Christ to redeem us, to be our kinsman redeemer, what did he had to go through to say to Satan, they belong to me. I'm redeeming them. I'm going to go at the cost of dying on a cross for them. So it is still the foreshadowing of Jesus, but I have to explain the whole thing of the sandal and the kinsman redeemer and the Goal because of the fact that that was playing such a huge part in the story. But we will see in session number 2, we will bring it back into the implication for us and obviously Jesus Christ.
Thank you.
Okay. And so you see that we have the sandal. This is one. The sandal is on the scene, and actually, sandals have been found in archaeological excavation. You can see there just an example of a sandal that was found somewhere in Galilee, probably around the time of King Solomon. But I would pretty much say that it's safe to say that they probably wore sandals similar to that in the time of Ruth as well. And once the sandal has been removed, whether it is the other redeemer or Boaz, the presence of the sandal, we have this climactic moment here in Ruth. Because Boaz says to the elders and all the people, you are my witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belongs to Elimelech, and all that belongs to Chilon and Machlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Machlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Okay? So, okay, so as I said, Carol was saying that it sort of makes it a bit cloudy with regards to this foreshadowing of Christ. And what I was saying before we got thrown out of our session is that don't let the legalistic jargon and picture take away from that. And I hope that in the second half of the lecture that you'll see that it's still there. And even if we look at this legalistic thing, it's just a spectacular moment that comes to fruition in a city gate, that it's not just a willy-nilly type of thing, that, as I said, that took the whole thing of looking after widows, looking after orphans seriously. And so there were laws with regards to that. And those laws were put there to protect those who are orphans and widows. As much as it would have been very difficult for a widow to be in that kind of culture, there were laws that were trying to protect them. And a sandal is, as I said, is on the scene, and it's in this moment that Boaz took responsibility for another. And that's what I want you to see out of this chapter, that Boaz took responsibility for another. And if I had to just kind of summarize it to a very short statement, just what the story, this climatic moment in chapter 4 does for me, is to look on at what Boaz has done and just to ask myself and maybe us the question, how can I be that for someone else? How can you be that for someone else, to take responsibility of another? Because when Boaz either takes off his sandal or receives a sandal, that sandal in that moment represent darkness that becomes light. We are in a dark period of Judges, as we said, and yet you have this bright light of Ruth and Boaz, and the incredible integrity, and now the marriage that has come together that was proposed at the end of chapter 3 and now is made legal in chapter 4. This hopelessness becomes hope. The hopelessness that Ruth left, the hopelessness that Naomi felt, they have been brought to a place of hope because Boaz took responsibility. Emptiness now becomes fullness, and it was symbolized around the present of a sandal. Okay, and I don't know, can you see that? Are you getting what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Carol, are you feeling a little bit better now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Which again just gives us something to wrestle with, something to ponder, to ask the question, where may God be calling us to take responsibility for another? And it's a good question for the church as a whole and for us as individuals, and to recognize that it would actually cost us something in order to do that. But love is costly. God's love for us was costly. The most compelling kind of love is costly. And it cost Boaz something to step into this role. Yes, he received in return, but he also had to make a decision that he was going to focus on someone else and come to the aid of someone else, to take responsibility for a situation for someone that didn't have the capacity to do that on their own. And maybe right now, God is helping you to see a situation or a person when you can be that to them, where God is requiring you to take off your sandal or to take on their sandal, so to speak. Whether it's someone who is in a financial need and you are able to step in and help, maybe give advice, maybe it's a real great initiative that you know could help a lot of people to get something. Maybe as a church collectively is a new thing that is happening that requires a costly thing from the church. Maybe it's a basic need that they're not able to get on their own. This could go so many different ways. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are so drawn to the story of Ruth and Boaz is because we see the fidelity, the integrity, the generosity that we see in Ruth and Boaz, this chesed, this compassionate loyalty that we talked about in terms of how God loves people well, his covenantal faithfulness, and is we see it being all over the pages of the book of Ruth, and we are compelled by that because we recognize that that is love in its truest form. And so, my prayer for you guys tonight is that may you wrestle with the implication of being one who brings a sandal into the moment and takes the responsibility for another. And so there you go. There is part 5 of our series in Ruth, and we've got one more episode left, and it's going to be a fantastic one. I can't wait for you to hear that one and what we're going to share in the next lecture. So, yeah, before we say goodnight, are there any questions or observations?
I think we need to, I need to definitely listen again tomorrow.
Okay.
I found that last week as well, listening to it the second time,
Mm.
clarified things for me. Yeah, it's a lot to take in because for me, it's very different from perhaps still Sunday school days of how I saw it. Sometimes we need to actually grow up and move away from the Sunday school stuff.
Yeah.
But very often these stories have been left behind. We don't hear many sermons. In fact, I can't remember the last sermon I heard on the book of Ruth.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
don't
it's
think-
given me a lot of food for thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Pauline, you were going to say?
No, I was going to say too, I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on Ruth either,
Okay.
or on the part of the story.
Yes, yeah.
Perhaps we're challenging you, Lachai.
To preach on Ruth. But now you see, a good part of my congregation are my students now, so they've been spoiled. You see,
They approve you.
yeah. But I hear what you guys are saying, and absolutely, I mean, it is going against, in a way, of what we think, and we romanticize Ruth, and it is a romantic story, and yes, there is a big foreshadowing, and we will see in our last lecture how that book brings about this whole thing of, you know, where does it fit in the bigger picture. But I think that the implication of us taking the role of a kinsman redeemer, that the church is the firstborn, the church is that kinsman redeemer to the world, and we should bring in that sandal, that responsibility of saying, I'm going to take responsibility over you, whatever it's going to cost me, because I'm following Jesus, and it cost Jesus, it cost the Father his Son, to redeem his church, and I think that that's very important for us to think. So yeah, these are discussion questions for you guys to look at, and then obviously if you want to study further, there it is in front of you. And then next week, most stories are built to a climatic moment. Boaz redeeming Naomi and Ruth at the city gate, and then concludes with the following action, not Ruth. Instead, the book of Ruth ends with a genealogy loaded with surprises that reverberate with implication, not just for Naomi and Ruth, but for the people of Israel and the whole world. And in this final lecture of 6 of our series of Ruth, you will see how trusting God's character rather than your own circumstance would give you the ability to spot God's hidden presence in your life. And I'm sure most of you know that Ruth is in a genealogy of our Lord Jesus Christ. And I don't think that it was just a coincidence, but again, God's intervention in changing that circumstance and bringing in our kinsman redeemer. Guys, just before I go into our last slide, the question was from Lisa, and I see that there was a lot of interaction from our last lecture, and I love that because that's what I want. I want an interaction. I want you to wrestle with it. I want you to not feel comfortable because that is theology. Theology makes you feel uncomfortable. You go deeper, and you grow spiritually. You understand things better. So I'm glad that there's a conversation. And the question really was, what about praying with our feet? Praying with our legs, and really basically the implication there is that, and the guys from the Hill, we spoke about it on Sunday, James chapter 2:26, that a faith without works is dead. And that's really what I'm talking about. Praying with our legs is that we it's not a monologue. It's not just us telling Jesus what we want in prayer, but it's supposed to be a dialogue. And not only that, but out of the dialogue, there needs to be an action. Okay, and that's what James is talking about. It's not just okay to say I've got the faith. I need to do something about, and that's what I'm talking about. The praying with our legs is that we need to get into a situation. It's not just okay to say I'll pray for you, and some of us do, and some of us forget. But to actually go into the circumstances, maybe if the person is asking you to pray about a situation at work, pray on site with insight. Okay, pray with your legs, move, let it be a action. And those who know me well know that when the Bible talks about meditation, it's not just crossing your legs and doing this and it talks about that word, that Hebrew word chagah. It's like a bull being set out, after it's been locked for a long time. It's that being sprung into action, and that's what I mean about praying with our legs. Is we need to not just pray with our mouth, with our lips, but be springing out, bringing about that action. I hope that helps not only Lisa, but everyone else who might have had that question. Okay, and then guys, my next series will start on the 11th of September into the 23rd of October, and this is possibly going to be my last lectures. I'm thinking of doing something different from lectures, but I will chat to you guys about it. And but this possibly will be my last lecture format that I will be doing. But the next series is Jesus and the Galilee. About 90% of Jesus' ministry was in Galilee. And we asked the question, why wasn't it in Jerusalem or Bethlehem or any of the other places? Why Galilee? And why spend so much time ministering to the other side, which is the other side of Galilee, which was the Gentile side? And we're going to be looking at Jesus and the Galilee, the location of Galilee, and what was so important about that area that Jesus decided to spend most of his ministry time in that area. So it's going to be a very different lecture to what we've been doing now with Ruth. So I hope you will join me. If you do, just send me a private message. Please put me in. Some of you have already done that. And then I will enroll you and I'll send you the details, what you need to do in order to be a part of the next series. So I hope you're excited for lecture number 6 and for the new series. Yes?
Very much.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Great, guys. All right. Have a good night, and we will see each other in our last lecture next week.
Lovely. Thanks, Lachai.
Thank you. Thank you, Lachai.
Thank you, Kai.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Cheerio.